He was stopped at the airport over nothing more than a simple red Maga hat, and everything spiraled from there. A security officer humiliated him in front of a crowd, relishing his moment of power. But what the officer didn't know was that this ordinary passenger owned the very airline he worked for. The ending of this story became a lesson neither of them would ever forget. The chaotic hum of Los Angeles International Airport filled the air. Boarding announcements echoed through the terminals, hurried travelers jostled for position, and the metallic clatter of luggage wheels against tile floors formed a steady backdrop. Jonathan Reed walked calmly toward the security checkpoint. His tailored navy suit and polished shoes projected an air of authority, but the bright red Maga hat on his head was what drew attention. His gait was steady, his expression composed, yet his sharp gaze hinted at someone used to handling problems head-on. At the security station stood Carl Henderson, a mid-level TSA officer, scanning IDs and boarding passes with mechanical indifference. He moved through his routine like clockwork until his eyes locked onto Jonathan. The Maga logo on the hat hit Carl like a red flag, flipping a switch in his mind. His previously detached demeanor transformed into irritation. Carl leaned toward his colleague at the next scanner, his voice low, but dripping with disdain. "Hey, check this out," he muttered. "Another Maga guy. $10 says he's gonna start whining about freedom." His colleague smirked, but didn't respond, while Carl straightened up, preparing for what he assumed would be an entertaining confrontation. Jonathan reached the conveyor belt, placing his briefcase and neatly folded coat onto the scanner's rollers. He moved with practiced efficiency, entirely unbothered by the subtle stares around him. Carl stepped forward, his voice flat but tinged with sarcasm. "Step forward, sir, but before you do, I'm gonna need you to remove that hat." Jonathan paused, his calm demeanor unwavering. "May I ask why?" he said, his voice measured. Carl crossed his arms, his smirk widening. "Airport policy. Everyone follows the rules." His tone was deliberately louder, pulling the attention of nearby passengers. Jonathan glanced briefly at the gathering eyes before turning back to Carl. "I see. Could you clarify which rule I'm violating by wearing a hat?" Carl didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice laced with condescension. "You're making other passengers uncomfortable. That's reason enough." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. A few people in the growing crowd whispered among themselves, some nodding in quiet agreement with Carl, others watching silently. Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "Rules should apply equally to everyone, don't you think?" he said evenly. Carl, emboldened by the subtle murmur of approval from a few onlookers, didn't back down. "Especially to people wearing hats like that," he retorted, his emphasis unmistakably aimed at Jonathan's political affiliation. A small group of passengers gathered at a safe distance, their curiosity piqued by the tension. Phones were discreetly raised, ready to capture the scene. The atmosphere grew heavier as Jonathan stood his ground, his calm contrasting sharply with Carl's growing smugness. "Then let's ensure we're all clear on the rules," Jonathan said, his tone steady but firm. Carl's smirk deepened, interpreting Jonathan's words as a challenge. The standoff was just beginning, and Carl was confident he had the upper hand. Carl straightened up, clearly deciding this was his moment to shine. His voice grew louder, commanding attention from everyone within earshot. "Sir, if you don't remove that hat, I will have to deny you passage through this checkpoint. This is my zone, and I make the rules here." Jonathan remained calm, though his piercing gaze hardened, like steel sharpening under pressure. "Your personal opinions do not override my rights," he said firmly, his voice measured but resolute. Carl's smirk returned, and with a dramatic flourish, he grabbed his radio. "Security, please report to the scanning area. We've got a passenger refusing to comply," he barked, his tone deliberately theatrical. The commotion caught the attention of more travelers. People paused mid-stride, craning their necks to see what was happening. A few began recording on their phones, capturing the interaction for posterity, or perhaps virality. One voice cut through the murmurs. "Just take off the damn hat. You look ridiculous anyway." Jonathan turned his head toward the heckler, his composure unshaken. "Ridiculous," he said with a faint smile. is forgetting the value of free speech." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and the onlookers fell momentarily silent. Carl, however, was undeterred. 2 uniformed security guards arrived, their faces a mix of irritation and confusion as they approached. Carl, eager to solidify his control over the situation, gestured toward Jonathan. "This passenger is causing a disturbance. He's making others uncomfortable with his behavior," Carl said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. One of the guards stepped forward, his posture firm but not overtly hostile. "Sir, we need you to leave this area," he said, looking Jonathan in the eye. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his calm now tinged with incredulity. "Leave? On what grounds?" he asked, his tone polite but unyielding. Carl, relishing the growing tension, chimed in before the guard could respond. "This passenger," he declared loudly, ensuring the crowd heard every word, "is disrupting the flow and creating discomfort for other travelers with his appearance." Jonathan tilted his head slightly, as if weighing his next words carefully. The crowd murmured louder now, their curiosity giving way to divided opinions. Phones remained raised, recording every second of the standoff. The stage was set, and the tension crackled like a live wire. Before the security guards could take any further action, a clear, authoritative voice rang out from behind the gathering crowd. "Mr. Reed, welcome back. How was your trip?" Heads turned as a woman in a crisp navy blue suit pushed her way through the throng. Her name tag read Lisa Gray, and her polished demeanor left no doubt. She was someone important. Jonathan's expression remained composed as he acknowledged her approach with a slight nod. The crowd buzzed with murmurs of confusion. Carl's smug expression evaporated instantly, his jaw slackening as he took a half step back. His confidence faltered, replaced by an uneasy wariness. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed?" Carl stammered, his tone now dripping with uncertainty. Lisa turned sharply to face Carl, her professional smile tightening into something far colder. "Yes, Mr. Reed," she emphasized. "He's the new owner of our airline. Thanks to his investments, we've just upgraded half our fleet last week. Why? Is there a problem here?" The words hit Carl like a physical blow. His face turned pale as he stumbled over his response. No, ma'am. I didn't realize." Jonathan straightened his posture, his calm gaze now as icy as a winter storm. His voice cut through the awkward silence with precision. "So it seems your personal triggers might have just cost you your job." The crowd erupted into hushed whispers. Some people exchanged knowing glances, while others stared at Carl in disbelief. A few began clapping, the sound hesitant at first but quickly gaining momentum as the realization of the situation settled over them. Carl's mouth opened as if to protest, but no words came out. He looked from Jonathan to Lisa, searching desperately for a way to salvage the moment, but the damage was done. The balance of power had shifted irreversibly, and Carl was now at the mercy of the man he had tried to humiliate. Lisa turned to Jonathan, her professional tone softening. "Mr. Reed, I deeply apologize for this misunderstanding. Please, allow me to escort you to your gate personally." Jonathan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he let the moment linger, his gaze sweeping over the now silent Carl, before finally addressing Lisa. "Thank you, Ms. Gray. That won't be necessary, but I trust you'll ensure such misunderstandings don't happen again." Lisa nodded emphatically. "Of course, sir. Consider it handled." The weight of the scene hung heavy as Jonathan stepped forward, leaving Carl frozen in place, his career likely crumbling around him. The applause followed Jonathan as he walked toward the terminal, a silent victory underscored by the stunned faces in his wake. Carl stood frozen, his complexion ashen. His hands fidgeted nervously at his sides as he attempted to stammer out an explanation. "Mr. Reed, I didn't know. I was just trying to—" Jonathan cut him off mid-sentence, his tone cold and unwavering. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You knowingly violated a passenger's rights because you decided that your personal opinions outweighed the law and basic professional ethics." The crowd, still gathered nearby, fell silent, their collective gaze locked on Carl, who seemed to shrink under the weight of Jonathan's words. He tried again, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to cause—" "Enough!" Jonathan said firmly, his authoritative tone silencing any further protests. At that moment, a small group of airport administrators arrived, clearly alerted to the escalating situation. They hurried over, their expressions a mix of alarm and deference as they approached Jonathan. The lead administrator, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, I'm deeply sorry for this unacceptable incident," he began, shooting a pointed look at Carl, whose shoulders slumped further. "This does not reflect the standards of professionalism we uphold here." The administrator turned to Carl, his voice cold and final. "Mr. Henderson, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Collect your belongings and report to HR." Carl opened his mouth as if to argue, but quickly thought better of it. He turned away, his face a mask of humiliation as he disappeared into the crowd. The administrator then addressed Jonathan again, his tone now bordering on pleading. "Mr. Reed, if there's anything we can do to rectify this situation, please let us know. Complimentary upgrades, expedited service, anything at all." Jonathan shook his head, his expression calm but resolute. "All I ask is that every employee here remembers their job is to protect the rights of passengers, not to demean them." The administrator nodded quickly, making a mental note as Jonathan began walking away. The gathered crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, their murmurs of admiration and quiet applause following in his wake.